Well, to get more insight on this, we can speak now to Professor of European Foreign and Defence Policy and author of This Is Not a New World Order, which looks at European geopolitics, Mr. Sven Biscop. Thanks for your time. Looking as that NATO summit gets underway, we're seeing most member states agree to that increase in defence spending, hoping that it will prompt the US to increase its commitment, if you like, to protecting them. But the latest we're hearing from Trump is that that isn't going to play out.
Indeed, it confirms his earlier statements that he is not as committed to defend all allies in all scenarios. And to me, it means that we must urgently reconfigure NATO. Of course, it's very much in our interest to maintain the alliance, but even within NATO, we should have two pillars, in my view, the United States and then Europe. And we should build military autonomy within the alliance so that our armed forces are no longer dependent on the United States to be operationally effective.
How do you envisage seeing that, basically Europe forming its own NATO within NATO? What would that mean? And how do you see cooperation within European member states? Because we have the EU and they've talked about having their own army and coordinating there, but the coordination and the unity is often what scuppers plans.
Nobody is talking about setting up some sort of armed force under the EU flag. But within NATO, one could reconfigure the defense posture. And what NATO now tries to do is build one integrated set of forces, Americans and Europeans combined. But the US have been quite explicit that we may no longer rely on their conventional forces. So basically, all the Europeans together should invest in the so-called strategic enablers that now we don't have, that only the US brings to the table. Think satellite, strategic communications, headquarters, air defense, our own offensive missiles, so that all the Europeans together have a complete set of forces that remains fully interoperable with the United States, but is no longer dependent on the United States in order to deter and defend Europe. And I would say the EU's role is to facilitate this through its defense industrial policies.
But you do think that European countries as a whole need to increase their defence spending, or is it more a case of how they spend it?
It's a combination. We do need more defense spending, and probably 3.5%, which is the level that we were at during the Cold War, will be necessary. But we must urgently take some of that initial spending and spend it collectively. Otherwise, we will never have those big-ticket strategic enablers that until now only the United States provides.
And why do we need to spend more? Is it because of the threat of Russia? Has that grown substantially? Is that why we need to pour more money into military matters?
Certainly, Russia has become a lot more aggressive. And I mean, Europe remains one of the safest places on earth on the condition that we invest sufficient in our deterrence and defense. And it is now clear that we may not always count on the United States to beef up our deterrence. So the urgency is there because Trump has made it clear that he has his own view of Article 5, and he's actually talking directly with Vladimir Putin, seeking to normalize relations with Russia without really consulting Europe. So that explains why suddenly it has become urgent to make sure that ultimately Europeans can defend themselves.
How big a task do you think it will be for European nations to change their mentality when it comes to their defence structure? I mean, since the end of World War II, they have seen the United States as their protector. Will it be an easy shift, or how do you see that playing out?
No, exactly not. And the subservient message by the NATO Secretary General shows you this traditional mindset of bowing to Washington. But I think it will not work. You see how everybody signs up not just to 3.5%, but to 5% in the hope of appeasing Trump. But in my view, it will not work because Trump is Trump. He will get his 5% today, and tomorrow he will have forgotten about it, and he will find another reason to be unhappy with Europe. And don't forget, Trump fundamentally doesn't care about NATO, I think. What he cares about is the EU because he's against it. He sees the EU as an economic and political rival. So getting 5% at the NATO summit will not stop him from waging an economic war against the EU or from interfering in European domestic politics to the benefit of the extreme right.
Now, you say Europe is still one of the safest places in the world, but we are getting messages from Brussels saying, we need to have this emergency kit for 72 hours. We're hearing that Germany is reopening bunkers, that they are expecting a potential attack within the coming years. To what extent are we in danger? To what extent are things, looming towards a global war?
It is obvious that if and when the war in Ukraine comes to an end, Russia will rebuild its forces. That's a logical thing for them to do. And so it will take them a couple of years to be back at the level where they were before they invaded Ukraine. But that doesn't mean that there is an imminent threat of Russian invasion. But again, on the condition that we send a message that Europeans, whatever the position of the US is, are able also to defend themselves and are willing to fight. That means that we need to beef up our forces again, but also beef up our political unity.
Indeed, and when you look at recent events, the bombings of Iran, once again based on accusations of them having so much enriched uranium. Where does this leave things when it comes to those international laws around warfare?
Of course, now I have no sympathy whatsoever for the Iranian regime, and it is clear that the development of a nuclear weapon by Iran is illegal. But that, of course, does not make it legal to launch a preemptive military attack on them, which we have seen is actually not capable of totally destroying the nuclear program anyway. So I think Trump's strategy of making a deal with Iran, well, he broke the deal, of course, during his first term. Now he's trying to make a new nuclear deal. I think Netanyahu, by launching his surprise attack, tried to thwart that strategy. The US then joined in and now is back to the realization that actually you need a deal with Iran if you ever want to stabilize the region.
Okay, Mr. Sven Biscop, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks so much for your time and bringing us your expertise on the situation, your insight into it all.